they definitely did it right, you know? I don't know. And we'll get into this more obviously as we talk more about the plot and the dirty details of it all, but I think as far as movie production goes, there's a lot. I mean, if you think back, what trilogy or movies that have at least three in them did they not mess up on the first, second, or third time? And then, especially when they're trying to round it out, not be able to pull it through. So I think this is almost a rare third, I guess you could say, of movies where the first two were good and then the third one is great. So I definitely, when we were talking about what movies we were I wanted to review with you, it was actually a difficult thing to come up with a third movie to review, but also when I started really thinking of it, it was a pretty short list, especially if we're talking about movies that I believe truly, if you're gonna like watch one of the three, this is the one that you should watch of the movies. You'll be real confused, but
Right. Yeah.
it's definitely, in my opinion, the best of the three. So
Yeah. And I think I feel the same way, honestly. So I call this trilogy talk. We're going to talk everything about this movie and the trilogy and the previous movies. We're going to talk everything we liked, we didn't like, fun facts. We're just going to throw it all together and we're just going to roll with it. So, Matthew, the floor is yours. I will let you take it away. What are your thoughts on this movie?
So, to my knowledge, the uniqueness of this movie comes in that when you really break it down on a plot basis, just, none of the details, if you just strictly follow and watch, storyline building up to the climax and then falling off to the resolution. These three movies, without context, are kind of carbon copies of each other, right? So you could argue that they all have an extremely similar build-up, an extremely similar climax, and an extremely similar resolution. Especially the resolution. If you've seen this movie before, which I know you have, they all end the same way, with Jason Bourne dying nearly and then getting away, and then the closing credit music plays, and it is a fantastic song because you know that Jason Bourne lives to be badass another day. So, but that being said, where there's a lot of similarities between these three movies, there's a lot of differences as well. And you back out and you look at it, and I in my opinion, think that the first two movies are more similar to each other than the third movie, in that the third movie tells a similar story but much better, and it pays a lot of homage to the first. And we can dig into this a little bit more deeply once we've gotten into the conversation, but you see Jason Bourne making similar decisions that he had to make in the first movie, but making them correctly or differently or the same, which is a really confusing way to put that, but to a different completion, and yeah. So I guess that's where I'll start with that really confusing overview of the trilogy. I'm curious what you sort of saw from these three movies and how you kind of came to a similar conclusion to me that the third movie was told the best way.
I'll start off by saying a few fun facts about this movie that tie into what I'm going to say. Okay. So, this movie, The Bourne Ultimatum, was nominated for and won 3 Academy Awards in 2008. Best Achievement in Film Editing, Best Achievement in Sound Editing, and Best Achievement in Sound Mixing. It's the only Bourne film to be nominated for an Academy Award, let alone win, and it won 3 of them. So that alone already tells you that this was maybe at another level. But I don't know if you know this, I certainly didn't know this until I came across this. I credit this to the IMDb trivia section, but it's so fascinating because it's so true. The Bourne film franchise has some very coincidental similarities to the Terminator franchise. Have you heard of this?
I have not heard of that before.
All right, this will be interesting. So, both had three different directors, both had five movies. The main actor in the first three films didn't appear in the fourth one, and only one film won an Oscar, while the other four films weren't even nominated. The supporting actress and actor from the Bourne and Terminator movies, Julia Stiles as Nikki Parsons from the Bourne movies, and Earl Bowen as Dr. Peter Silberman, respectively, are the only actress and actor who appear in the first three films with the main actor.
Hmm.
So both franchises have all of those similarities with each other, which is just really interesting.
Yeah. Huh. That's one of those things too where it's like it's not a planned coincidence. It's
Right.
just something that happened. It's not like they were trying to copy the Terminator in any other aspect. They just happened to fall into the same category that way. That's cool.
Yeah. And even to be compared with a James Cameron
Yeah.
movie franchise like the Terminator is just it obviously speaks volumes, right? But so yeah, obviously like it would nominate four and one Academy and three different Academy Awards, as where the other movies weren't even nominated. And it's tough because I feel like those other movies probably could have been nominated for some reason they weren't. But like this movie, everything is just on such a an excellent high bar, high level of achievement. I mean, the action is just top notch as always. I really like how this movie and the franchise as a whole, but specifically this movie builds tension and suspense. Every single situation is brilliantly thought out, and you're going to laugh at this. It really reminds me of The Dark Knight, or vice versa.
Okay. All right. I
You know,
like
just
it.
the way that thriller mystery aspect action vibe to it really lends itself to like that comparison. It feels in a lot of ways like a Christopher Nolan kind of style movie, right?
True. Yeah. The ups and the downs are similar, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my thinking of it. I mean, I think it's just so cool how they're very smart. Every one of those movies is very smart in terms of character and not necessarily to just be an exposition dump, right? Everything is logical and there's very complex things going on here, but very fascinating ways of going about it,
Hmm.
at least each situation, right? I think of, towards the end of this movie, there is a scene that may or may not be one of my favorites of any of these movies where you know Landy, I think is her name, she gets a call from Bourne, and like all of a sudden he says, hey, meet me here, and then she goes, but and the whole CIA follows, right? And then all of a sudden, he all of a sudden, the what's his name, Vosen,
Oh.
like the
Yeah.
head guy at the
No.
CIA.
No Vosen.
Vosen. Yep. So he also he gets a call from Bourne, and he's like, "Well, where are you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm in my office." Lying, because he's
Hmm.
not going to tell him where
Hmm.
he's at, right? And he's like, "Really? Well, that's interesting because if you were in your office, we'd be having this conversation face to face."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh my gosh, what?" Like he totally played them and knew what he was one step ahead because he knew that they were going to do that. You know, so like, that's an excellent way. I mean, I also think of another one of my favorite scenes is the one where they're in Waterloo, right, with Ross, the reporter
Hmm.
from the Guardian, and Bourne is like there trying to help him weave through this and not get caught by all of these people who are trying to get him, right? Because he has information that they don't want to get out, right? And the way that Bourne is helping him do this, like you got to do this at this point, you got to go to your left immediately, like stay to your left, tie your shoe, hold on, tie your shoe, and stuff like that. Just to that scene is a really fun scene of you really get to see Bourne doing what he does best, right? Like he knowing the situation, he sees the cameras, he knows where they're at. He can see by the different kind of people who are the guys that are out to get him, and the right way to figure out the situation. It's just so brilliantly smart. Like Tony Gilroy, the screenwriter, and Paul Greengrass. I mean, just incredible the way that they crafted this movie. And all three movies. I mean, all these movies have this aspect to them, right? Like they're very well crafted, very well thought out, and it's not just action for the sake of action. It's not just. I mean, nothing's cheap. Nothing's done just for popcorn entertainment, right? Everything has a purpose, right? And that's why I compare it to a Christopher Nolan movie, because Christopher Nolan does that in all of his movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing
Mm-hmm.
is there by accident. It's done purposefully, and it's done to make the movie the best movie it can be, and not just a generic, action thriller, right?
Yeah, exactly. And all of this background on the movies, Jason Bourne still has amnesia. So he still doesn't technically know who he is, why he knows what he knows. So he's still able to tap into being such a fantastic action hero without going down the direction of like a Michael Bay action movie where it's all like explosions and bombs and guns and no story.
Megan Fox, yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's other forms of entertainment that don't necessarily lead into the story, but this movie and all the other ones, but this one especially, they're even during the action, like you were saying, he's telling the reporter, do this. So that's a very tense, very action-packed moment where there's not necessarily a lot going on screen. You feel the tension, you understand what happens if which party catches him first, sort of thing. Either he dies, he gets taken into custody, and questioned and never let out to see the light of day. It's a extremely action packed scene without a bunch of fighting, a bunch of gunshots, but you can feel the action, you can feel the tension, and there's still a lot of story that's being told at that point too. You're still finding a lot about the movie at while that's going on. So yeah, it's an extremely unique way to tell a story in an action movie.